This week saw some stunning news out of Haiti.
We have breaking news from Haiti, where the country's president is dead this morning, assassinated in what's being described as a middle-of-the-night attack. Jovenel Moïse had been in office for 4 years and had been the target of months of protests. Haiti's interim prime minister said Moïse's wife was also wounded in the attack.
That's right. The president of Haiti was assassinated in his own home. Now, this wasn't your typical presidential assassination, the kind that happens when a president is out in public and some crazed gunman runs up to him and just shoots him. This was a well-executed assault on his house by highly trained mercenaries from the United States and Colombia.
The assassins arrived in trucks after midnight, claiming to be agents of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. A U.S. government source told Reuters the DEA had nothing to do with the killing. The gunman, reportedly speaking Spanish and English, descended on President Jovenel Moïse's private residence and opened fire. The 53-year-old leader was killed. His wife, the First Lady, also shot.
So that certainly raised a few eyebrows. According to the Haitian police, there were 2 Americans and 26 Colombians involved in the assault. The 2 Americans and 15 of the Colombians are now in police custody. 3 have been killed and 8 are still at large. And just this morning, the Associated Press broke the story that the men were hired by an American private mercenary firm based out of Miami. The AP reporters spoke to some of the family members of some of the mercenaries, including the sister of one of the Colombians. He writes, quote, Capador said her brother, who retired from the Colombian army in 2019 with the rank of sergeant, was hired by a private security firm with the understanding that he would be providing protection for powerful individuals in Haiti. Capador said she knew almost nothing about the employer, but shared a picture of her brother in a uniform emblazoned with the logo of CTU Security, a company based in Doral, a Miami suburb popular with Colombian migrants. The wife of Francisco Uribe, who was among those arrested, told Colombia's W Radio that CTU offered to pay the men about $2,700 a month, a paltry sum for a dangerous international mission, but far more than what most of the men, non-commissioned officers and professional soldiers, earned from their pensions. Now, the news that this attack was likely carried out by an American firm is pretty shocking, to say the least. And according to that AP report, one of the Americans who was arrested had previously worked for Sean Penn when he was doing relief work in Haiti after the earthquake. Sean Penn, he's took down El Chapo, he's in everything. So this story just gets weirder and weirder by the day. Now, the question on everybody's mind is, what the fuck, man? Who ordered the hit and why? Like, usually when there's a terrorist attack, there's a rush to claim credit. I mean, that's like the whole point of a terrorist attack. But with this one, no one has come out and claimed credit. So what happened? Well, in an interview with Jacobin, Kim Ives, the editor of Haiti Liberté, posits a theory. Haiti Liberté's working hypothesis is that the mercenaries more than likely were hired by one or a consortium of the bourgeois families who are opposed to Moïse. Reginald Boulos is one, Dimitri Vorbe is another, and there are several others who were unhappy with Moïse. If this hypothesis is correct, their fear is of the uprising that is coming out of Haiti's vast shanty towns, where the lumpen proletariat is organizing itself into armed gangs, which have now vowed to carry out a revolution against the bourgeoisie and the rotten system, as they call it, in Haiti. Now, Haiti has been undergoing a major political crisis for a few years now. There's been widespread discontent with Moïse's rule, and this has led to massive protests and subsequent police repression.
Haiti is burning. For weeks, thousands of angry protesters have been marching through the streets of the capital, Port-au-Prince, demanding that President Jovenel Moïse step down.
Democracy! Coup d'État, moi, pas besoin. Démocratie, kidnapping, non, pas besoin. Démocratie, en vérité, faut venir jouer en Haïti.
Now, amidst the chaos and the government's lack of legitimacy, large swaths of Port-au-Prince have been taken over by armed gangs. And last year, several gangs banded together in a sort of gang alliance called the G9. This is from a report in Haiti Liberté. In June 2020, 9 armed groups from Port-au-Prince's poorest neighborhoods formed an alliance called the G9 Family and Allies. Their spokesman, Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier, announced on June 10th that the coalition's launch was the beginning of an armed revolution against Haiti's stinking, rotten, corrupt system, serving the bourgeoisie, which was split in backing 2 rivals. One faction of the bourgeoisie, he explained, supports the clique surrounding President Jovenel Moïse, and the other faction backs his political opposition, headed by outspoken lawyer André Michel and former Senator Yuri Latortue, both of whom backed the 2004 coup d'etat against President Jean-Bertrand Aristide. The G9 is not working for the regime, and the G9 was not created by and is not working for the opposition, Cherizier said. It was created to never again have robberies, rapes, and kidnapping in our neighborhoods, but also for the ghettos to get their due. Schools, clinics, hospitals, services, running water, infrastructure, and all the security which the rich neighborhoods get. Now, this guy, Jimmy Cherizier, aka Jimmy Barbecue, has been the subject of great controversy.
Naturellement, nous sommes des gens qui aiment servir les gens. Et naturellement, nous sommes des gens qui toujours ont protégé les gens depuis faible passé, même dans l'enfance. Je dis, je suis un leader qui a un pile écoute, un pile monde croit en moi, un pile monde mise sur moi. Ma boumé contre un système qui fait un petit groupe moun gen tout privilège là, ou l'autre petit groupe moun pas gagner. Maintenant si yo qui t'aime grandi, j'aime grandi là, yo vinn trouver tant que son menace pour yo.
Despite the evidence against him, Cherizier promotes himself not as a criminal, but as a man who can bring order to the streets. The power to do that, he says, comes from his position as the man who brought the G9 alliance together.
Toute l'armée qui est unifiée, il n'y a pas d'ennemi pour écraser. Et moi-même, en tant que leader, moi été choisi par là avec l'autre leader qui est dans l'autre quartier populaire. Côté que, j'ai choisi de dire, système ça qui utilise nous pour nous gommer nous une contre l'autre, c'est système ça qui mette famille nous dans misère, dans crasse, salier journée aujourd'hui.
Now, this guy, Jimmy Cherizier, aka Jimmy Barbecue, is a former cop who was then kind of hung out to dry by the police force and then became a sort of gang leader. And a lot of the mainstream press, certainly here in the United States and also in Haiti, portray him as a criminal thug. But others see him as a sort of revolutionary hero.
Jimmy Cherizier was a stellar policeman who was basically radicalized by his betrayal by the Haitian police leadership, who hung him out to dry after a operation went badly in Grand Ravine in 2017. And he was dealing with some of the leading lights of the opposition, Reginald Boulos, previously mentioned, a guy called Yuri Latortue, who is also an alleged former death squad leader and was called the poster boy for political corruption by the U.S. Embassy itself in the WikiLeaks cables that we released a decade ago. So he soured on them too, and he saw that both the government of Jovenel Moïse and the opposition, the bourgeois opposition with which Daoud is aligned, were rotten. And he said, we need a revolution because the people need schools. They need clinics. They need sanitation. He took me around the neighborhoods of Delma 4, Delma 2, Delma 6, where he grew up. He's the son of a poor street vendor. And he showed me how people had to do their toilet in a plastic bag and throw it in a canal. And he said, people can't live like this. So he has been calling for a revolution against the system in Haiti and is being radicalized really by the day and by these events. So the portrayal of him in the mainstream press, by the AP, the Washington Post, is he's this gang leader. He's the boogeyman. But the reality is on the ground that this is an uprising really of Haiti's lumpen proletariat, which has been crushed over the past decades and Jovenel Moïse was no different, and Martelly. And the people, the masses in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, now some 3 million, 4 million people have had enough and are rising up.
Now, regardless of whether Jimmy Barbecue is more of a Haitian Fred Hampton than a Haitian Al Capone, one can see that the prospect of the poor masses of Haiti's ghettos organizing themselves into an armed gang that the state is incapable of confronting would freak out the local bourgeoisie. So, with the growing power of the gangs in the ghettos on the one side, and a president who was unwilling or unable to confront that power, and who nevertheless was trying to stay in office for a year longer than some thought he should, you could see why the local bourgeoisie might have wanted him gone. Now, the roots of the crisis in Haiti run deep. At its core is the fact that there is a large mass of poor people in the cities who were displaced from the land by neoliberalism. Quote, 50 years ago, Haitian society was a largely rural peasant society, but over the past 35 years, since the fall of the dictator Jean-Claude Duvalier, the neoliberal reforms championed by Washington and Haiti, the dumping of excess food, everything from flour to rice to oil, has decimated Haitian agriculture. The result is that millions of peasants have been ruined and have moved to the cities to join the ranks of this huge lumpen proletariat. And obviously, that presence of a large mass of poor people in cities freaks the rich people out. Now, a lot of this was due to the policies of friend of the show, Bill Clinton.
First of all, we have to go back when we look at Bill Clinton and his relationship in Haiti when he was president. One of the worst things that he's done that's still hurting Haiti now, especially in the wake of these disasters that keep happening to Haiti, is this policy where he took the excess rice from Arkansas, where he's from, and dumped it in Haiti and used our tax dollars to subsidize it.
Now, this policy of food dumping had disastrous consequences for millions of Haitians. And years later, when Bill Clinton was appointed special envoy to Haiti in the wake of the 2010 earthquake that killed as many as 300,000 people, Bill Clinton said, oopsie daisy.
Since 1981, the United States has followed a policy until the last year or so we started rethinking it, that we rich countries that produce a lot of food should sell it to poor countries and relieve them of the burden of producing their own food. So thank goodness they can leap directly into the industrial era. It has not worked. It's maybe been good for some of my farmers in Arkansas, but it has not worked. It was a mistake. It was a mistake that I was a party to. I am not pointing the finger at anybody. I did that. I have to live every day with the consequences of the lost capacity to produce a rice crop in Haiti to feed those people because of what I did. Nobody else.
Oh, if only someone could have predicted that. Now, the Clinton crimes in Haiti do not stop there. In 2011, WikiLeaks published a series of State Department cables that showed how the Hillary Clinton-led State Department intervened to block a minimum wage increase in Haiti.
Revelations also that the U.S. Embassy and contractors for U.S. clothing giants like Levi Strauss and Hanes signaled displeasure at Haiti's initiative to raise the minimum wage for factory workers. U.S. officials advised the Haitian government that a $5 per day minimum wage, quote, did not take economic reality into account, suggesting $3 per day instead.
Thank you to the Clinton family for all that you do. But back to the assassination of Moïse. Like I mentioned, the news broke this morning that the mercenary firm that likely carried out the operation was based in Miami. And that is troubling for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that it is legal to simply run a soldier of fortune company in the United States. And think about how crazy that is. This is the natural consequence of a very troubling trend in recent years, namely the privatization of war. In a piece in The Atlantic written by a former mercenary named Sean McFate, he writes, quote, "For decades now, the centrality of contracting in American warfare, both on the battlefield and in support of those on the battlefield, has been growing. During World War II, about 10% of America's armed forces were contracted. During the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, that proportion leapt to 50%. This big number signals a disturbing trend. The United States has developed a dependency on the private sector to wage war, a strategic vulnerability. Today, America can no longer go to war without the private sector." He continues, "Contractors also encourage mission creep because contractors don't count as boots on the ground. Congress does not consider them to be troops, and therefore contractors do not count again troop level caps in against troop level caps in places like Iraq. The U.S. government does not track contractor numbers in war zones. As a result, the government can put more people on the ground than it reports to the American people, encouraging mission creep and rendering contractors virtually invisible. Think about that when we think of, for example, Biden pulling out all the troops from Afghanistan. He's going to pull out like the troops, but they're going to leave behind a bunch of these private mercenaries who are not counted, and the government does not know how many there are, or at least they don't tell us. And the numbers in terms of dollars are absolutely mind-boggling. Quote, contracting is big business too. In the 2014 fiscal year, the Pentagon obligated $285 billion to federal contracts, more money than all other government agencies received combined. That's equal to 8% of federal spending and 3.5 times Britain's entire defense budget. About 45% of those contracts were for services, including private military contractors. So much of war making these days is done by these private mercenaries who operate totally outside of any public accountability. Now, according to a report by the National Defense University Press, private forces has become a big business and global in scope. No one truly knows how many billions of dollars slosh around this illicit market. All we know is that business is booming. Recent years have seen major mercenary activity in Yemen, Nigeria, Ukraine, Syria, and Iraq. Many of these for-profit warriors outclass local militaries, and a few can even stand up to America's most elite forces, as the battle in Syria shows. The Middle East is awash in mercenaries. Kurdistan is a haven for soldiers of fortune looking for work with the Kurdish militia, oil companies defending their oil fields, or those who want terrorists dead. Some are just adventure seekers, while others are American veterans who found civilian life meaningless. The capital of Kurdistan, Erbil, has become an unofficial marketplace of mercenary services, reminiscent of the Tatooine bar in the movie Star Wars, full of smugglers and guns for hire. So if you're some country's rich capitalist and you want to get rid of the president or, say, a trade union leader, you can simply go to Kurdistan or Miami and hire a group of highly trained psychos to carry out the violence. It's, for lack of a better term, pretty fucked up. Now, it's only been a few days since President Moïse was murdered, and the details are still emerging. Hopefully, we will learn more about who was actually responsible for it, and right now, we can only speculate. The question is, what happens next in Haiti? The country has plunged into chaos in the wake of the assassination, and the interim government has requested the U.S. send troops to help with the security, which is pretty remarkable given that the last time Haiti asked for U.S. troop support was after their president was killed in 1915. Woodrow Wilson sent U.S. troops to Haiti to quell the unrest and proceeded to stay there for the next 2 decades. And that's going to be the question now. If the local bourgeoisie is unable to tame the unrest on the streets and confront the growing power of the G9 and Jimmy Barbecue, will they ask for foreign intervention? We'll have to wait and see.
That's crazy. Just the whole thing is just wild. And yeah, I mean, it'll be really interesting to see where this ends up, because I could see maybe some leftists thinking about it in a romantic way, like these gangs of working class people come together. But you could also see a situation where that ends up terribly, or even some of these mercenary groups get in on some of that action. So, and this also just, I think, speaks to destabilization. Like, even if the United States was not directly involved in this incident, like, this is the product of all those years of intervention and destabilization. And I mean, a lot of people talk about this. I think most of our listeners will know, but with Haiti, this goes all the way back to the Haitian slave revolution, where they were still forced to pay debt to France for doing the unthinkable of not being slaves anymore. And everything has kind of just flowed from that. Then it's in this situation where, I mean, what's going to happen if we put troops on the ground there? Like, is that really going to end well? Do we really think that's where we want to go? But they create these situations where it's like we create the problem and then come in as the supposed solution to the problem.
Yeah, I mean, and I think about Haiti a lot because, I mean, I'm from Miami, where this private contracting firm was based, and in Miami, the big topic du jour is always Cuba, but there's a large Haitian population in Miami as well. Haitian refugees fleeing, this just the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And there's a lot of talk about the poverty in Cuba and, the awful system in Cuba, and that's because of socialism or whatever. but like Haiti is a capitalist state,
Right.
with very close ties to the United States, like all that shit, and it's far poorer and worse off than a place like Cuba. And what I find interesting about this latest thing is the presence of these Colombian mercenaries, because Colombia is another state that is very close to the United States. It's incredibly tight ties between the national security state in the United States and Colombia's national security state, Plan Colombia and all that stuff, in the fight in the drug war. And it's created like this essentially class of Colombian warriors who are all over the world fighting wars, not just with this latest thing in Haiti, but in Yemen and in Nigeria and like these. And this is all fueled by the billions of dollars that the United States pumps into Colombia to train these people and to build up their national security state. So it's all kind of linked. All of this is all tied. And I like reading about this guy Jimmy Barbecue. Obviously, like he is. He is saying a bunch of like left-wing things, and that's great. But he's also like, like you said, you can imagine this becoming very,
or he becoming the next sort of like warlord, mercenary leader. And it makes me think about, I mean, how much easier does this make pulling off coups? Because at least before, like a government, it wouldn't be the best look for them to do it. They would have to be secret about it. They would have to mobilize their parts of their own state. But I mean, it's so much easier now if you can just rely on a private army for a coup.
Yeah.
And really what you said about, imagine, like a union leader, like you just want to get rid of a pesky Coca-Cola union activist in Mexico or something, using private army to do it, which is really scary to think about.
No, I mean, this reminds me of that story, that very funny story that happened last year of the private mercenary Jordan Goudreau, who tried to, who got a bunch of the Venezuelan bourgeoisie expats in Miami to pay him some money, including Juan Guaido, to do a contract for him to do a coup d'etat in Venezuela against Maduro. Obviously, the situation is very different from Haiti. The Venezuelan state, is very powerful.
Right. And was that the embarrassing thing where they just like came off the beach and were like
they like live tweeted the coup, and showed up in Venezuela with their passports.
Like, hi guys, we're here to do the coup thing.
We're here for the coup. It's like that scene in Old School, like, I'm here for the gangbang, I'm here for the coup. It went horribly wrong, but like, that's what they did. They just like, these rich guys were just like, oh, there's just like private armies you can hire for $2,700 a month per guy. That's like not that much money for
that's better than like San Francisco rent.
Totally. So it's this whole idea of this new mercenary class, which again is like, there's the old saying, like the oldest profession in the world is a prostitute. Well, like the second oldest is a mercenary, a soldier of fortune. And that's just exploded in recent years with this kind of new type of warfare that exists, where it's all just kind of chaotic skirmishes, and not like World War II history documentaries where it's like, the tank units are rolling in, and now it's all just kind of these shadowy figures who are accountable to no one, and not, they're not uniform. They're all wearing whatever it is. It's just it's a pretty grim outlook.
Right. Yeah. And I think like, the big thing with Vietnam was eventually the costs and the body bags were too much. And I think that tilted public opinion and the anti-war movement. But, you're not going to have that same dynamic with private security firms.